The major pentatonic scale is fundamental to Western melody, and it's hardly surprising that it shows up in music from all over the world. In this video, I'll be going through some of the Indian ragas that use the modes of the major pentatonic scale, and give you some ideas for creating interest in your phrasing when you might be limited to just 5 notes. Pentatonic literally means 5 notes, so any scale that has just 5 notes in it is a pentatonic scale. In Indian music it's called odav odav, which means 5 notes on the way up and 5 notes on the way down. Except in Indian music it may not necessarily be the same 5 notes on the way up as on the way down. If you take into account the fact that the root note would definitely be one of those 5 notes, then there are 330 possible pentatonic scales that you could make out of 1 octave. But most of those would be musically useless. So when people talk about the pentatonic scale, they're normally talking about the major pentatonic scale or one of its modes. So let's start with a tone wheel that has all the semitones laid out in a circle. And the major pentatonic scale is the root note, the major second, the major third, the fifth, and the major sixth. To get the other modes of this pentatonic scale, you just rotate that pattern around, keeping in mind that you have to have the first note in there. In Western music, we use pretty much 2 of these modes. We use the major pentatonic and the minor pentatonic, which is the one where you shift it around 3 semitones. So starting with that first mode, the major pentatonic scale itself, in the key of C, those notes are C, D, E, G, and A. In Indian music, they would be called sa, re, ga, pa, and da. And the easiest place to play those notes is centered up here around the 5th fret, because all those notes line up on the same fret. I'm sure you recognize this pattern. It's probably the most common pattern that people learn on a guitar because it fits into blues, into country music, and pretty much any other style of music as well. The most common raga that uses these notes is rag Bhupali. You might wonder how you could possibly continue to be creative in a situation where you've got an hour-long piece that uses just 5 notes. And it gets harder than that too, because not only do you have to use just these notes, you also have to use each one in a special way. So each of these ragas has a vadi, which is the most important note in the raga. They also then have a samvadi, which is the second most important note. The other notes then are the helper notes, if you like. Some of them you're allowed to land on at the end of a phrase. They're called nyasa. And other notes you're not allowed to land on. They're just passing notes or less important ones. So when you keep all of that in mind, there's very strict limitations on what you're actually allowed to play if you're going to be playing a raga, as opposed to just playing in that mode. But for the sake of playing guitar on YouTube, there's lots of things you can do to make your music more interesting. We as guitarists often think in a fairly linear way, where one note then is preceded by the next note up or the next note down in the scale. Which is fine, but in Indian music, very often to get from one note to the next note in the scale, you go past it and come back to it. So you're going in a zigzag or a wave flowing motion. So there are lots of ways you can do that. To start off, just to get the idea of it, you can just play in a zigzag like this. works, but it doesn't really get across the idea of it still being a linear movement, just embellished. So instead, now, imagine that you are playing these notes, but coming at them from above. So the note above is like a grace note, and that note is softer and quicker than the other ones. So you get this sound. One of the reasons that Indian music can be so creative with so few notes is that really the notes of a raga are just the places where the pitch flattens out. But between those notes is an infinite playground of pitch to use as long as you keep moving from one note to the next. So when you look at the tone wheel, where in Western music it's quantized to 11 semitones, Indian music sees it more like this. You can approximate that idea on a guitar by sliding. As long as you slide fast enough, you hear the start note and the end note, but nothing in between except movement. If you slide too slowly, you'll hear all those defined pitches in between. And most of those weren't in the raga. So you would play from, say, the C and slide up past the next note, past the D, then back down to it. And then past the E and then back down to it. And continue like that all the way up. On the way back down, you go up first and then down. You can play all the way up the scale using this idea, and the way I've worked out of getting from string to string is to slide up on one string and then slide back down on the next one. Then if you had a phrase that sounded like this, fairly simple phrase, it would then sound like this. Once you've got the slides sorted out, you can then incorporate some bending where you slide up to the next note, but then continue up with a bend. And then back down. And if you keep doing that all the way up the scale, you get this sound. Then on the way down, you play the note bend up and then slide down. If you shift this pentatonic pattern around, the next mode you'll get is the minor pentatonic scale. There's a raga called Dhani which uses these notes. I'll show you another technique. This is called gamak, where you slide and land on the top note as opposed to sliding and landing on the bottom note. You slide up as you're plucking and land on that note, and then you can slide up to the next note too. That sort of thing. The next mode is the major pentatonic scale, but starting from the fourth note. So the trick with these ones is to try and maintain the sound of it being in C, despite the fact that from a harmonic standpoint, it really is in F. So this next raga is called Rag Durga. The next mode is the minor pentatonic scale, but again starting from Ma, the fourth. The fourth becomes kind of like another root note, and the first becomes like the fifth. Especially for my ears anyway. It sounds to me like everything's just shifted, so now it's in F instead of in C. The raga that uses these notes is rag Malkauns. And lastly, we have rag Megh. Megh uses the last mode of the major pentatonic scale, which doesn't have any third in it, so there's no major or minor sound to this raga. Megh actually means cloud. It's a rainy season raga, and it's sometimes called Megh Malhar. The last technique I'll show you is something called katka. In Western jazz terminology, this might be called note enclosure, where you come at a note from the note above, and then you go one semitone lower, and then go back to that note again. So it would sound like this in slow motion, which actually means that you're using a note that isn't in the rag, but you use it so quickly that you don't hear it. You just hear this note played twice, like that. It's not so much used in pure classical music, but it's used a lot in light classical music. playing in pentatonic scales like this really does require you to be creative in different ways, and I hope I've given you some new ideas of how you might be able to do that. In the next video, I'll be showing you some other ragas where the pentatonic scale is hidden, normally in an ascending scale, and then you add extra ones on the way down. So I hope I'll see you for that next video. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.